Of life and tree of death. Tree of death and tree of life. Those are the most significant trees that we climb and that impact our perspective on the world. For the church, we celebrate the tree of life in the waters of baptism. We celebrate the tree of death at the communion table. And today, on this All Saints' Day, I will ask you to connect both. As you rush forward, so to speak, and change your perspective on the world, you will be asked to come to the waters of baptism and take a light that represents the names and names of people that you love, that we remember in death as the communion of saints, and bring them to the table of life where we remember the sacrifice of Jesus and all things are collected and gathered. And today's story is absolutely a story of a tree of life and a tree of death, or a tree of death and a tree of life. I guess it just depends on your perspective today. I remember the week of my dad's death. It happened so fast. 1 minute he was sick and in the hospital and sent home with antibiotics, and he went back the next day. I got to visit him on Sunday and all seemed well, and he was himself, as best self as he could be with his disease of Alzheimer's. And I came home, and then on Monday, the call came from my sister that he was going to hospice. And I think, what in the world just happened? Tree of death, tree of life. We're able to look back upon the stories of life and death and tell that story differently based on time and proximity and where we happen to be in our particular climb today. All of you are invited to climb the tree with me today. By climbing the tree, I simply mean, if able, to go up the steps to the altar, which, as you note, is higher than the church, and to change your perspective as you see what you can see, as you leave a light upon the table or tree of life. Zacchaeus, I think, was a good tax collector. Now, tax collectors weren't very well loved in the day because they took people's money. And because they were authorized by the government to collect people's money, they often collected more than they needed, which is why so many were wealthy. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, wanted to see who Jesus was, but because the crowd was obscuring his vision, he could not. Because genetically he was given a bad hand, he was short. He could not. Because perhaps of his wealth, people would not make way for him. Although I think Zacchaeus was a good man, I don't think he was well liked, loved, or respected by the crowd. And so I think they blocked him and would not make way for him to see who this Jesus was. He was blocked by circumstance, by size, by job. He was unable to see Jesus. I think the same problem exists in the world today. Many people want to see who is Jesus. And they too are blocked, and their perspective is obscured. I think in many ways, culture and crowds block people from seeing Jesus. They block people from seeing Jesus by saying you're not welcome, or perhaps by judgment or treatment of the type of job someone else might have, or their wealth, or their prosperity, or maybe even their body size, looks, or genetics, like Zacchaeus, short genetics. But today maybe it's color or race, sexuality, identity. There's a lot of ways that the vision of Jesus is obscured and blocked. Maybe even in your own personal life, just you as a person, a being, you are blocked perhaps from seeing Jesus today for some reason. Maybe just a sense of sadness as you remember on All Saints' Day, people who have died long ago, or not so long, and maybe they were old and ready, or young and innocent, and maybe they were dear and unfinished business was left, or maybe you were ready to say goodbye and it was peaceful. But it is amazing how the tree of life and the tree of death, or the tree of death and the tree of life, seem to change our perspective both on the world and upon Jesus. In the text, as Zacchaeus realizes, for whatever reason, he is not going to get to Jesus, an amazing thing happens to him. He runs ahead. He moves forward. Isn't that just the hardest thing to do sometimes, to move forward? To move forward past what we're upset about. To move forward past a memory that is hard. To move forward past something that has occurred that we don't quite see from our vantage point or understand. And what a miraculous power and grace that takes place in Zacchaeus. The desire to move forward and rush ahead and to gain a new perspective. And not only is Zacchaeus motivated to run ahead, he climbs a tree, a sycamore tree. A relatively easy tree to climb. The way a sycamore tree has so many branches, easy to access and grab and climb. It's not like it was a pine tree. It was accessible. Did any of you ever climb a tree as a child? I bet most of you have. And many probably don't climb trees anymore. Isn't it funny how the things we do at youth, our excitement, our joy, our ability to climb seems to be so fresh and vibrant. And then when we get old, the tree of death and the tree of life, or the tree of life and the tree of death, seem to just take away our ability to desire to go forward and climb anymore. Not only does Zacchaeus rush ahead and climb, and he gains a new vision and perspective, but from the tree, Jesus looks upon him and says, Zacchaeus, come down. I am going to stay at your house. And in spite of everyone else around who looks upon this scene and says, why is this Jesus going to a sinner? All these other lovers of Jesus who have gathered around to see him, and they are wondering, why is this Jesus going to see this guy, this sinner? Well, I don't know. All I know is Zacchaeus rushed ahead, changed perspective, climbed a tree, and Jesus called out his name. And from that moment forward, he was changed. You see, I think he was a good guy because he says, I'll give half my money to the poor. And then he said the really crazy part. If I have defrauded anyone, I will give them 4 times as much money back. No one in their right mind would say such a silly thing unless they in their mind have been honest and, treated people fair. Could you imagine how much it would have cost him? I think today, you and I in our world has a sense of goodness within us. We're doing as good as we can, and in our own minds, we are doing well. And like Zacchaeus, perhaps we know we don't owe anyone anything because we have not tried to cheat them. We have simply done our life, our tree of life or tree of death, or tree of death and tree of life in a way that we feel okay about. We know not perfect. But others look upon us and wonder, why would Jesus love them? Why would Jesus call my name or your name to say, come down, I'm going to your house today. Salvation has come. My grace is here. And so it is when we have the ability to move forward and to climb a tree and to change our perspective. Because the promise of faith is that Jesus will always come by. Jesus will always pass by. You don't know it, but you have already climbed the tree by coming this morning. You have. You're in the branches. What do you see? In our world, it is still possible to welcome people, to invite them to climb, and to trust that Jesus is still about the business as passing by to change our perspective, to take those of us who think we're doing good, we work hard, we give time, we show kindness, to take those hearts that we have, those services that we give, and to transform and change them to something even more powerful and better. That is an amazing grace that lives today. Amongst the best of you, the very best of you, when our perspective is changed, when we're in the tree, and when Jesus says, come on down, I'm coming to your house, something new is ahead. And we have confidence to know that things will change. I can tell the story of my dad's death today differently because I've rushed ahead. Time has passed. The greatest amount of courage and faith that was displayed at my father's death was my mom, who, when the doctor said to her, listen, we can nutritionally heal him and we can pump him full of bacteria. We can do it all, but we need to put a feeding tube in because he's not eating and he's not super agreeable and he had Alzheimer's. And so all of that was difficult. And you know what my mom did? She said, no. Because she knows that the tree of death is also the tree of life. And so today, I just invite you to try to change your perspective, to know that Jesus continues to pass by. Climb the tree of faith as best you can. Come forward, remembering the waters of baptism as we call on your loved ones. Come to the table to know that our loved ones are gathered there in the communion of saints, and we are not without hope if we are in the tree of death. For the tree of death is the tree of life, which we come to through the waters of baptism. In the end, all of this was made possible from the perspective of Jesus, who didn't necessarily climb a tree, but was placed upon a tree, on a hill, and gave us all the perspective we would ever need, which is, I love you and I forgive you. Today, I invite you to celebrate your trees of life, your trees of death or trees of life through baptism, communion, and God's grace, which absolutely is still calling to change your perspective today. Amen.